I saw him at the end of the hallway. He was on the phone, and I put your hand in your brother's hand, and I pushed you towards his office, and I watched you walk away, and then I turned around and I walked out the door, and I never came back.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hi, dear family and friends. This is my 10th podcast I'm sharing with you all, and I'm feeling so excited because 80% of podcasters never get this far. I can't wait for you to hear another inspirational and eye-opening episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you aren't already doing so, please subscribe and share, dear family. It means the world to me and makes the biggest difference. Rena Sofer is a brilliant and beautiful actress, best known for her striking blue eyes. She was born in Arcadia, California. Her mother was a housewife who walked out on her family when she was just 2 years old. Her father, a conservative rabbi, picked up the reins of being both parents to her and her older brother, David. Rena was discovered at age 15 by a New York talent agent and started modeling before turning to acting. Rena made her first mark on television on the soap opera Another World. She went on to win an Emmy on General Hospital before appearing on primetime shows like Seinfeld, Melrose Place, Friends, NCIS, 2.5 Men, and more, to name a few. In 2013, Rena returned to her daytime roots, taking a leading role on The Bold and the Beautiful. She married her on-screen spouse Wally Kurth from General Hospital and took on the duties of being stepmother to his daughter Meghann, who was just 8 years old at the time. 2 years later, they welcomed their daughter Rosabel. 2 years after that, they separated, eventually divorcing. And then, 2 years after that, she met and fell in love with Sanford Bookstaver, a director and producer. They have a daughter named Avalon, who is now 14 years old. After 14 years of marriage to Sandy, Rena got divorced. Rena and Sandy fell back in love and are officially re-engaged with plans to remarry. Rena says, sometimes you are lucky enough to find the man of your dreams all over again. A happily ever after love story if there ever was one. Hi, Rena.
Hi, Rachel. What a story.
What a story. So we're recording at your house, and you have how many dogs running around?
I have 4 dogs running around. You have 4
dogs and one on your lap.
One is on my lap. There's some under the table eating bones, so I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, please don't be sorry. I love it. I love it. So I just want the listeners to know that you and I first met back in 2003 when our daughters were babies. They were a year or less.
Yes.
And
in like Mommy and Me.
Yes, in like a Mommy and Me. And you did not really want to be social with the other moms or go to parties. And you used to claim to me that you had no friends and that you were a recluse. And yet we became fast friends. And I always took that as a real compliment. But over the years, I've definitely seen you change. You're so much more social and actually maybe the first to like have a party at your house. So we'll talk more about that later. But First of all, thank you for being my guest. And I want you to tell us, since this is a podcast called Dear Family, why don't you tell us a little bit about your current family, and then we'll talk about your past.
Well, my current family, I come from a really small family, you know. My father, who was an Orthodox conservative rabbi, he lived an Orthodox lifestyle, but his temples were always more on the traditional conservative side. But his family side is Hasidic. They're very religious. I come from a huge family. I just don't really have a connection to almost any of them. We speak sometimes, but I mean, my father's brother had 3 children, and within those 3 children, they had 33 children. And then they had, I don't know how many children. So I have lots of cousins. I just don't have any connection to them. And then my mother had a brother. and he passed a few years ago, but I'm very close with his wife and his 2 kids. Other than my brother and his husband, who've never had any children, that's about it. And then my current fiance, who used to be my husband, he's an only child. So we really have a very small, close family. And here in Los Angeles, it really consists of me and Avalon, Sandy, and my brother and his husband. And then my 2 daughters are just not in LA, but I'm also still really close with Meghann and Rosabel as well.
So I want you to tell us a little bit about your mom.
Okay. Well, my mother, and it's interesting because when you were introducing the podcast, part of me thinks, wow, how is she going to react to hearing you say she was a housewife who abandoned her family? Basically, that's her epitaph, right? I mean, if you think about it, this is who she is. This is what she's known for. And I think it would really kill her to know that she's not known for being feminist who stood her ground and decided to go off and find her way in life. She's really known, especially in our family and by me, who has kind of a voice to the public, as a woman who made the choice to abandon her family. And that is what she did. She claims that she read The Feminist Mystique, which is a book that was very popular back in the mid to late 60s. Betty Friedan wrote this book. And it's funny because Betty Friedan later in life was interviewed and she said, I wrote this book and all these women read it and decided that they were going to leave their families. And she said, I was a stay-at-home mom. I was not trying to tell everybody to leave their families. That wasn't the point of my book, but that's the way my mother interpreted it. And basically, my mother married an Orthodox rabbi, a modern Orthodox conservative rabbi. She was never a religious woman. Being the wife of a rabbi means that you basically service your husband in the community that he services. And that's the last thing that she ever wanted to do. She was 18 years younger than my father and fell in love with this beautiful, handsome man who had been in the Israeli army and had 2 PhDs. And she thought, oh my God, what an exciting life I'm going to have. And she really hated it pretty much from the get-go. And once she had my brother, she was thrown for a loop as to, wow, this is not what I want to be, a mother. And then she had me and she just thought, oh, now I'm stuck, And then one day, just before I was 2 years old, she took my brother and I to my father's temple. And his office was at the end of the hallway across from the entrance. And his door was open and she could see that he was on his phone. And I know this because she told me this story a number of years ago before I stopped having any relationship with her. And she said, I saw him at the end of the hallway. He was on the phone and I put your hand in your brother's hand and I pushed you towards his office and I watched you walk away. And then I turned around and I walked out the door and I never came back.
It's just unimaginable to me.
She used to say to me, once you have children, you'll understand why I did what I did. And I remember when Rosabel was 2 years old, I looked at her and I thought, I can't understand more than anything now why or how anyone could ever walk away from a child that's 2 years old who so desperately needs their mother at that time.
Yeah, I can't even go there. But then your mom went on to live on a commune?
Well, my mother went on to decide that what she really wanted out of her life was to be in academia. So she actually, what I also found out is she ran off with her college professor. She had been taking courses at Santa Monica University, ran off with her college professor, ran up to Santa Cruz, and started going to school at the University of Santa Cruz. And she she got a PhD in developmental psychology of all things.
What an irony.
Irony, right? And she really spent all of her working life in academia as a professor and really working with people of color. She really found her calling working at,
which is so admirable, but I don't know how she was able to
I don't know how
live.
admirable it is.
Okay.
You know, I mean, because she basically was creating this world of pushing propaganda as opposed to finding a way through the difficulties, you know? And I think she liked the fight. I think that she was somebody who always had her hands up.
Got it.
She always had her fists up. And she raised me to be the kind of person to always have their fists up. And so when you spoke in the beginning about how I was this person who didn't feel like I've ever had any friends and I wasn't very social, I don't think I was very social. I think I spent so many years of my life trying to be like her and constantly being ready for the fight. And that doesn't really work when you're trying to make friends. And it doesn't work when you're going to a school like we went to, where it's just a bunch of stay-at-home moms, most of us, you know. I wasn't a stay-at-home mom. I was always working, but, you know, it was just one of those things where I never felt like I fit in. And I don't believe I ever really did fit in, except for you and a couple of other people that were able to...
shout out to Karen.
Yeah, who were able to see past it. You know?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I remember you telling me that your mom like introduced you and your brother at a very young age to marijuana.
Very young.
Can
Very
you
young.
tell us about that?
Yeah. So you said she lived on a commune. Every summer, you know, when she wasn't teaching or she wasn't trying to get her doctorate, she spent the summer in Massachusetts. And she had this commune house in Northampton that she lived in with her boyfriend at the time. And they were together for a number of years. So everybody lived in this house and everybody worked together in this house. And they were all in academia, you know, they were all psychologists, psychiatrists of one thing or another. And so they had this interesting plan to introduce all of us kids. I was 9 at the time. And it's funny because later on we have this argument where she says, no, you were 11. And I said, really, what's the difference?
Right.
And they would get us all stoned.
Unreal.
And then they would watch us.
Like do like experiments. Like, let's see what happens.
They would experiment on us. And it's interesting. I've never discussed this publicly. And it messed me up quite a bit.
I don't know how it couldn't.
But it...
And your brother too?
And my brother too. So that's something that I'm saying about him that he doesn't know that I'm saying. So hopefully he's okay with that. But yeah, they would get us all stoned. And just marijuana, by the way. Nothing, no other drugs of
They
any
weren't
kind.
giving you acid.
No. Because of course, I think that made them feel like they were being responsible. But then what they would do is, you know, we're coming down or we were looking for food because clearly we were hungry. We'd come back into some common room and they would all sit around and make fun of us and act out what they saw us doing or talking about as these little kids being stoned. And we would just kind of look at them like, you know, it took me years to figure out what was happening. But
what do you think was happening? Were they just stoned themselves?
oh, they were always stoned.
Yeah.
But they were abusive.
I mean, that's just so traumatizing for a child who's been abandoned, and then you're looking for love, probably even more so, and then they do that to their kids. I just can't even imagine. Honestly, Reena, you are such an incredibly strong, loving mother and friend, I will say. So I'm really proud of you for coming out of such a awful situation. I mean, back in the 70s, your mom may have thought she was doing something to help you, but it's just kind of mind-blowing.
Yes, it was mind-blowing.
And then your mom later came out as gay.
Yes, she came out as gay, as a lesbian when I was 15 years old. Yeah.
Okay. And you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but your brother also is gay.
Yes, my brother is gay, which I said earlier.
Okay, right. When did he come out?
I was 17. He was always gay.
He was always gay.
He was always gay. I was 17 when he came out. And I remember when my mother came out, I said to him,
so your mom came out first.
My mother came out first. And she came out because we were visiting my grandfather at the time. And it's funny, I have a terrible memory. I never can remember anybody's name. I'm the worst with faces as well when I'm out of context.
Yeah.
I can work with somebody every single day and then I see them in a mall and I'm like, I don't know where I know that person. And it's like, I work with you every day. I can't remember anyone I went to high school with or grade school with, which is why I'm not on Facebook. But she came out because we were at my grandfather's house and he was talking about how homosexuality was inherited. She started having this huge argument with him, screaming and yelling at him. And so she takes my brother and I outside and she says, I want you to know that your grandfather is wrong. Homosexuality is not inherited because I'm a lesbian. And it's funny because we should have known this at that point. She had been living with this woman named Judy who, at that point, and please remember if I'm being politically incorrect, I'm talking about my experience as a 15-year-old back in the 80s. She was a woman who looked like a man with really big breasts, right? Short hair, very masculine. And my mother was not involved with men anymore. And for some weird reason, she was always with a man. And she had a type, The men she would date always looked like Jesus Christ on the cross. Really skinny, long beards, long hair. And the women always looked the same, very masculine, huge breasts, overweight.
So interesting.
Women who looked slightly masculine. But she told us that. And I remember she then walks away, leaves my brother and I in, Fort Lauderdale, outside of my grandfather's house, shell-shocked. And I looked at my brother and I said, at least you're not gay. Oh, no. 2 years later, I was like, okay, But I mean, then it became this whole other thing. And I think I've told you this story as well, where I then, when my brother came out to my mother, he found so much support there, obviously. And my mother always loved my brother. My mother never really cared for me. But my brother, she loved. And she would say to people, me and my son are gay and we're working on the other one. So I remember being the only kid I've ever known who had pressure from their mother to be gay. And I was like, I'm so confused because, I wanted my mother to love me. I wanted to do anything to make her love me. And I just really couldn't do that because that wasn't who I was.
That's again, I'm proud of you for where you've come from. It's an interesting point too about how you said that your grandfather said that being gay is hereditary. In a way, I almost feel like that's very progressive, right? Because it's like you can't change someone, they're born that way.
Well, yes, but his point was, you're not gay because I'm not gay. And your mother's not gay.
Okay.
So your being gay is your choice, Susan.
Got it.
Whereas, that was her point. It's not
Thanks
hereditary.
For the clarification. Yeah. And then, so your dad, who I was lucky enough to meet because he lived with you for a while.
He lived with us for the last 13 years of his life. And then for the last few years of that, he lived with my brother and his husband.
Right. How does a father deal with two young kids and raising them?
He kept us as safe as possible from her. You know, as we were growing up, we never saw her until I was about 5 or 6. My father moved us as soon as my mother left to the other side of the country. We moved to New Jersey because my father wanted to make sure that she didn't change her mind and come back. You know, he really knew her to be dangerous. He never actually knew how dangerous she was. You know, and I was so young when she started being really emotionally abusive to us. He knew I would cry when we had to go and visit her. And that didn't start until after I was 5 years old, when she finally came back and said, oh, this mother thing, I may be able to do it. And she had made it clear, I don't want custody of you, but I want to see you. And she and my father started kind of a legal battle where eventually it ended up that she got us for the month of August every year and for 1 week during our spring break, which unfortunately was during Passover always. And we were kosher and she refused to let us be kosher. So she would basically starve us because she refused to buy us foods that were kosher for Passover. So my father would send us with money and we had to find a way to get our own food. Sometimes he would send us with food. But
it's kind of like she was getting back at your dad through you or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. She tried to undo everything he did in the year in that 1 month and
he was
1
such
week.
a lovely man.
He was
such a lovely
the best.
Man. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, thank God you had him, right? Right. Okay, we're going to switch gears now. So you were just 15 when you were discovered by a talent agent. And tell us about that. That's kind of like some girl's dream.
I was in the Village in New York City. I had just come back from being on tour in Israel, and I made friends for the first time in my life that were just different and got me. And it was
like a summer tour?
Yeah, it was a summer tour, but I spent 2 months there. And I just feel like it was the first time I had met friends that understood me, because the issue for me is I grew up in really religious Jewish schools. So even though I was friends with these girls, because of my mother's input in my life, even though it was 1 month and 1 week out of the year, you know, I'm hanging out with girls who had never experienced drugs. And meanwhile, I'd spent the entire summer basically stoned and running around.
For as negative as it was, it opened your eyes to a different.
Right. I mean, you know, I sit here today saying I'm grateful for the life that I lived because it brought me to who I am now, even though
that's a very healthy way to look at it.
Right. Even though it was somewhat difficult. So I'm in New York. I'm hanging out with these girls. We're in the Village. I'm 15 years old in New York City running around by myself, which, by the way, today would never let my daughter go into New York City by herself at 14 or 15. But I was in the city all the time. I lived in New Jersey right on the river. So it was a quick bus trip. It was like a 20-minute bus trip down into New York. And I was at, you know, the bus station. And then I would just get on the subway and make my way through the city, meeting up with my friends. I knew exactly how to do it. And this woman approached me and I thought she was trying to pick me up, and she wasn't. And she asked me if I wanted to be an actress. I think she asked me if I wanted to be a model. And I thought she was crazy because other than adults, I'd never been told I was pretty. Boys never were interested in me. And I was just this skinny little girl with braces and, you know, I had no self-worth. And that's the reason I got into it, is my father felt once we figured out she was legitimate, she was with the elite modeling agency, but with the petite division, because I'm only 5'5" and a half. He thought she, and as we say this, Rachel laughed because she's shorter than me.
Well, no, also because when you said petite, I thought like petite meant like young girls, but you're saying like stature.
Short.
Yes, I'm shorter than you. Yeah. So you're tall.
Yes, I'm tall. I'm very tall for Rachel. But he thought it would give me self-confidence.
Your dad is really wise.
Yes.
Was. And so at that point, you hadn't been acting in school or anything. This was like a totally kind of like divine intervention.
Yeah, I have never thought about acting, never wanted to act.
Okay.
It wasn't even on my radar. And honestly, I thought I would probably I love to read. So I thought I would become an English teacher. I thought, in the vein of wanting to make my mother love me, I thought I would become a professor, but I'd be an English professor. But, school was never my thing. And it wasn't that I wasn't smart, because I now know I was very smart. And I still am very smart. I said that in the past tense. But I went to very religious schools where they based how much you were worth on how religious you were. And if I had only been raised by my father with no outside input, I'm sure I would be a different person. The difference is when I would go to my mother's house where she was making bacon and we were riding on the Sabbath and, they were swearing and, all these other things going on. It just exposed me to a different world. And I'm actually grateful for that. But it just made me a different kind of person.
Okay, so you're 15 years old.
Yes.
You get discovered. Your dad looks into this woman. It's elite models. They say your dad gives you the thumbs up to proceed. What was that like?
Well, the first couple of years, or the first year and a half, was growing my hair out, getting my braces off, taking acting classes in the city. So I would go into the city twice a week in the evenings by myself. Again, crazy. And I would take acting class, sit and learn how to do commercials and act in whatever, we'd
and
get
did you
scenes.
fall in love with the craft of it, or were you just going through the process?
I think I was just good at it.
Okay.
It gave me, for the first time, because remember, I'm in a religious school and I don't fit in.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm with a bunch of people who don't care where I came from or how religious I was. And all of a sudden, I somewhat fit in. And that was a really interesting moment for me. And I think the reason that it propelled me into this career is because I, for the first time, fit in. Now, if the first time I fit in was at college, or if the first time I fit in was in a sorority, or maybe my life would have been different, but this was just the first time. And I found that I understood it. So it wasn't hard for me to figure out how to act, even though I'd never acted before. I just got it,
It's amazing. I love that this woman just plucked you off the street when
She
you
did.
had braces.
Yeah.
She saw something in you. That's
She
really
did.
amazing. Okay, so then you went on to work at Another World and eventually moved on to General Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I went from Another World, and then I was on a show called Loving in New York City for almost 3 years. Moved into New York by myself, had my own apartment. I was 18.
Amazing.
I was making money as an 18-year-old. I didn't go to college. And I mean, it was a dream,
it
really.
was kind of a dream for an 18-year-old actress.
And living in New York City as a working actress on a television show was wild.
Wow.
And I just spent 3 years going to clubs. Even though I was 18, I was allowed in. Back then, it was very easy. And I was on a show. So it was like, please come on
VIP,
in, stars of Loving. And
beautiful 18-year-old.
right.
Yeah.
I was hanging out with people who were 20 years older than me, 10 years older than me. And they treated me like I was the same age as them. And it was quite an education for me.
Oh my goodness. But in a weird way, you being 18, you were probably really wise beyond your years because you had kind of overcome a lot at a young age.
Yeah.
And I would say, myself, it was similar. Granted, I went off to college, but by the time I was 18, I was in college and everyone was partying and getting so crazy and wild. I kind of felt like I've been there, done that. I'm ready to focus. I'm ready to.
Exactly.
You weren't an 18-year-old with like these big eyes in New York, just totally overwhelmed.
No.
You were able to.
I was an 18-year-old who had been getting high since I was 11. Crazy. And at that point, we'd go out drinking, and I was like, I don't want to drink. You know, I had a friend who did so many drugs, and I was like, drugs, who cares about drugs? I never had an interest in drugs. The worst thing I did was, I took up smoking cigarettes because it made me feel older, and because I didn't drink, because I did not like to drink. I did not like the feeling of being drunk. I did not like the hangover of alcohol. And I also never liked being awake past midnight. I would get really tired. And I always, by the time 11:30 hit, I just wanted to go to sleep. So the only thing that I could do that made me not look like a child at a club was smoke. So I used to smoke, but I was never an addictive smoker. And my father died of cancer. So I stopped smoking when my daughter Rosabel was incredibly young. And she said, "Why are you smoking?" And then I flicked it away and said, "I will never smoke again." And I never did.
Well, so you've got good willpower. Okay, so after Loving, then you went on to General Hospital.
I moved to California.
And you moved to California. Mm-hmm. And your co-star was Wally Kurth. Mm-hmm. And you ended up falling in love and marrying him. How old were you?
I was 24 when I got on General Hospital. Wally and I fell in love really quick. And
must have been so weird to have your co-star also be your husband.
Yeah, I never really dated actors.
Yeah.
And, after Wally, I think I dated one more actor, which was also an enormous disaster. And then I never dated actors again. And when Sandy and I got divorced, I would never date it. And people were like, "Oh, you should date no actors." No. I don't do that. And I think Wally and I fell in love. He's such a good person, but we fell in love really because our story on the show was so well written. We fell in love as our characters. Every day we were saying these incredibly beautifully written words, and it was impossible to get past it.
Wow.
We fell in love as our characters. And I think that's what taught me what was so dangerous about dating actors, especially actors you work with, because it's really hard to tell the difference between the joy of working together and being excited about making money together, living your dreams together, and then having the reality of what life actually is outside of that environment. But when I was on the show, I got pregnant, which I never expected. And then we got married. And just before I gave birth to Rosabel, I left the show. And I hit enormous success in the primetime world at that time with ABC. And our relationship just kind of drifted away from us because we just realized once the show was over, we really didn't have anything more than that in common. I mean, we liked each other, but I don't think we were really good friends. And I don't think he really, as I say, quote unquote, liked me. I think he liked me. I think he loved me, but I don't think he really liked me like you should with somebody you spend the rest of your life with. And eventually it just really quietly ended. We didn't fight. We didn't argue. We just realized we weren't right for each other. And so when we separated, we actually were separated for a really long time. We never eventually divorced until he fell in love with his current wife and I fell in love with Sandy. And it was like, wow, we want to move on. We should probably get divorced.
Got it. Okay. So I'm curious if you deal with any mental health issues.
I think that definitely over the years, I've dealt with depression. And I think it's the same thing that you said about willpower. And I'm not saying that this works for anyone or everyone. It just worked for me, where I became a seeker. I'm sad. I'm depressed. I know I'm depressed. Why am I depressed? How do I get out of this depression? And I have tried everything. I've tried changing my diet. I've tried vision quests. I've tried every kind of therapy you can possibly imagine, psychotherapy, emotional therapy, inner child workshops, shame workshops. I've delved into walking around the world being my mother, dressing like my mother, talking like my mother. And I've tried having no relationship with my mother, not speaking to my mother, having a relationship with my mother, forgiving my mother, not forgiving my mother, forgiving her again. And, you know, I've read practically every self-help book that I could find. And I used to work with Tony Robbins, and I did his programs, and I took his certification course in NLP, and I walked around doing, you know, neurolinguistic programming. I mean, I spent my first, I'd say 35 years of life searching for what's wrong with me and how do I fix it. I tried antidepressants once. They really didn't work. I had a huge actual breakdown on an antidepressant and went, drugs aren't my thing. And drugs are not my thing. You know, I'm better off. And in fact, I suffer from horrific migraines. And the only drugs I actually take are drugs to make my headaches go away. And I hate being on them. So I realize, you know, drugs are not my thing. I don't want to escape my life. I want to figure out how to make my life work for me. And I really think I've been on a massive journey, which I'm still on. But I think it wasn't until just before my 50th birthday that I had that amazing epiphany of life that people tell you when you turn 40 or when you turn 50, all of a sudden your life opens up for you. Well, it didn't happen at 40 for me. It didn't happen at 30 for me, but it happened at 50 for me. And it was my life-changing moment, which is really what changed the trajectory of my entire life.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that. But, you know, I think it's so wonderful that you have always been on this journey and quest for self-awareness and self-understanding. You didn't let that kind of like abandoned little girl just crawl under a rock, and you know, you're constantly trying to learn. And again, the word self-awareness, when you know you're feeling down, you read, you seek therapy, you try to figure it out. That's all you can ask. And I'm so happy for you that you've gotten to this point of feeling like, okay, it's paying off, right? All that hard work, all those years of questioning, what am I doing with my life? Is it me? Is it? And, you know, look, you know, this is called Dear Family because our families can really fuck us up.
Oh, I'm sure I've fucked up my children as well. We've had that conversation.
We're going to talk about that because, okay. So,
but, you know, I got to say, my first step, and I don't know if this helps anyone, but my first step when I do feel like I'm entering into a sad phase or depression is to allow myself to be there. I actually spend a few days just going, it's okay to be sad.
Do you journal or anything, or you just take it in?
I'm the worst at journaling.
Okay.
I'm just the worst, and I should, but I'm terrible at it. But I do recognize, I remember when I was working in Tony Robbins' organization, that one day I walked in and they said, and I was just sad. I was just feeling down. And they said, well, you got to change your state. You got to change your state. Come on. You got to do something about it. You got to go do this and you got to go do that. And I go, can you just love me for 2 seconds and let me tell you why I'm sad and just let you hold me or love me through this? And they're like, no, you've got to put the program in order. You got to change your state. This is when I left Tony's organization because it was just the biggest, you know, I think that every book, every self-help organization, everything has something to teach you, but you got to have an awareness of yourself to understand what works and what doesn't. And when it doesn't work, you've got to let that go. You can't force that to work for you. And the thing I realized is people who are constantly needing you to change your state and not feel sadness are not acknowledging the real life we live in, which is sometimes you are sad. It's okay. And you need to feel the sadness, because sometimes sitting in the garbage is what helps you find your way through the garbage.
That's right.
But when you never sit in it,
yeah.
if you never sit in it, then you never actually get to see what the garbage is.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that sometimes, you know, why you're feeling this way is, oh, it's because of what I'm sitting in.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, it's like you can't take care of a wound unless you acknowledge it, right? If you don't see that you're bleeding, you're not going to be able to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you talked about how you love reading. And when our kids were in preschool years, we created a book club. And I have to say, it really helped me get out of a dark time when I was feeling kind of purposeless and I needed mental stimulation. You know, those first few years when you've got little kids at home.
Yes.
You're just like, I can't watch Elmo anymore or eat mac and cheese.
What is my purpose other than just being like basically a home?
And it was a really wonderful time for me, I can just say. And that group of women, we still keep in touch. And it was really important to me. But, you know, we had deep intellectual conversations. And it was during those times that you would occasionally talk about, I could sense that you kind of regretted not having the opportunity to go to college. And I know how bright you are. And I want to talk about your daughters and Rosabel.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Rosabel got a Fulbright scholarship.
Yes.
And Avalon is on the #1 debate team that has won like all the tournaments in Southern California. And you talked about your dad had PhDs, your mom went on to have PhDs. I'm so proud of your daughters. I'm just curious how it must feel for you to see them fulfilling their, you know, intellectual destiny. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about them and about what they're doing.
Well, I will, but I want to say one thing, because when you started this talk between us, you said, you know, we were part of this group, which was actually in a temple in the valley, that I never felt like I had any friends and I never felt like I belonged. Here's why that happened. When Rosabel was younger, there was a back to school night, or, you know, it was called Around the World. And these kids would set up kind of like, are you smarter than a fifth grader situation in each class? And the parents had to go to each class, answer all these questions, get a stamp on this Around the World thing. And we're all running around and we're choosing which classroom to go to, you know, and I'm starting in like kindergarten because I'm like, I can answer those. And, you know, I'm getting through this and it's really difficult, you know, obviously. There's a reason there's a show called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Because none of us really are. And as I'm running through, I turn to this one mom, you know, and I'm desperately trying to connect in this school with these parents, and they're all stay-at-home moms, and I'm still a working actress. You know, I have lots of time off. I'm able to.
I don't think they're all stay-at-home moms, but a majority.
But when I was there, all the moms in Rosabel's class were stay-at-home moms. They all were. And I'm running through this, and I turn to this one mom. I'll never forget her. And I say, oh my God, this is so hard. I can't answer half of these questions. And she then turns to me and she says, I know. I can't even understand why I went to college. I should have just become an actress like you. And she walked away.
God.
And I thought, wow. Number one, that's what they think of me. Number two, that's what they think of actresses. And number three, is that what I think of myself? And so cool. I struggled with that for the longest time, that I was not an intelligent person because these people didn't see me that way. And so, first of all, my greatest fear was that any of my daughters would become actors. And I've got to say, Meghann, my oldest, really did want to be an actor. And I think I was very strong-handed in talking her out of it. And I regret doing that to her because she should have followed her own path. And she happens to be someone who, if, I spent most of my early relationship with her trying to save her, being the mother I never had. Even though she has a wonderful mom, I tried to be the mother for her as her stepmom to get her to have a better life. And I made the choice of what that better life was. And she really wanted to be an actress. And I just did not want her to hurt the way I hurt in this business. But my other daughters, Rosabel and Avalon, never wanted to be actors. But Rosabel is an artist, and she's a brilliant artist.
Brilliant.
Like truly brilliant. Her work
like
is,
since she was little.
Yeah, she never ever did anything but draw.
I will put her links in the show notes so you all can see how incredible
Everyone
she is.
should buy her work now before you can't afford it.
It's really true.
And she's applying to grad schools now, and she blows me away because she is somebody who absolutely knows what she wants to do with her life and is tireless in her pursuit of it. And then Avalon is so goddamn smart that Rosabel and I even talk about that if we were in school with her, she really would never hang out with us because we would never be cool enough for her, actually. And she's just so, she puts more pressure on herself than anybody does. And
she's very self-possessed. She's also a musician. She's just,
she really is. And then Meghann, she has found editing and directing that she's so good at it. And I have to constantly pull myself back from pushing her because I promised her I would stop doing that. I would stop getting involved in her life. But I wish she could see in my mind how brilliant I think she is. I don't think she believes it in herself as much. And that's a product of her life and her upbringing and the stuff.
These stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, because she was 8 when I met her.
I will say, though, like, some of the most brilliant people I know are actors. Mm-hmm. And I also think that you don't have to go to college to be successful. No. So I just wanted to add that. I'm sure you would agree.
I don't think you do at all. No. But the one thing about Meghann that I think is so inspiring to me is she has constantly been on a quest to figure out her life. And she's not afraid to change her world in order to find her success. Whereas I think Rosabel knew exactly what she wanted to be, so it was an easier choice for her, even though I don't think life is easy. And of course, Avalon's only 14. But to me, Meghann is probably more my hero. So inspiring because to me, her path in life is so difficult. She reminds me the most of me because she is overcoming crazy family struggles and finding her way through it. And she's doing it in her own time. And the thing I love the most about her is I always looked for a mother figure in my life. Always. With my friends, especially. I would divulge everything about my life in the most diuretic way because I wanted somebody to make me the most important person in their life and care for me. And I tried to do that with her. And Meghann actually turned to me and said, I'm not you.
You don't need to save me.
I'm never going to be you. I love you for how you love and support me, but you got to let me do it on my own. And to me, that's the most inspiring thing.
Yeah, that is. And that's very, again, talking about self-awareness, very aware. Okay, so you just turned 50. And honestly, Reena, you're more beautiful than ever.
Thank you.
And I want you to tell us about this kind of love story with Sandy. And just, I think it's so beautiful and it makes me so happy. And of course, I'm sure your daughters are thrilled, but I want to hear the love story from you.
So when I did a show called The Chronicle, which was a sci-fi show. And I'm sad that, we did an entire 22 episode season and I'm sad nobody can see it because it was really good and it was really funny. But It was shot in San Diego, which is where I was not supposed to be. Rosabel was 3 years old, and I was newly separated from Wally, and I was not able to be home with her. I wasn't supposed to be shooting outside of Los Angeles.
Was this like part of a contract for?
It was a contract with a show, and in my contract it said it had to be shot in LA, but it was sold to a different network. And eventually what happened is they said, will you go do the show? We won't work you too hard, but then they did. And I spent a year away from Rosabel. Now, my dad was living with me at the time. My brother had moved to California. I had a nanny who was Rosabel's best friend on this planet.
I met him.
Yeah. He was her world besides me. And I think at that time I was still struggling with being a mother, how do I work and be a mom? And I didn't really trust myself. He was very important in my life, this nanny, Paul. He was my best friend. He was my everything, but he wouldn't move to San Diego with me. And I didn't feel it was fair to take Rosabel out of her world to suffice my guilt of not being with my daughter. And I had to go to the show because I had to live up to this contract. Otherwise, I would have been sued. And so I chose to leave her at home. Wally was with her during the week. And then I would drive home Friday after work. And then I would drive back to San Diego Sunday after I put her to bed. And I did that for almost a year. And it killed me because I was becoming my mother. I was the abandoner. I had left my daughter, and it killed me. So I'm prefacing this love story by saying I was not a happy camper. I was very unhappy on this show. It played on all of my mommy fears and abandonment issues. So I'm on this show, and we've got these directors. Every episode is a new director. And I'm single. Wally and I had separated, and I'm not interested in dating. And I had dated an actor after Wally who was one of the worst choices I've ever made in my life. And no, I'm not going to name him. And I was done with dating. And this kid walks on the set, and I turn to my makeup artist, my hairdresser, and the hairdresser says, oh yeah, I've worked with him before. That's the next director. And I said, he's a child. And he goes, no, he just looks young. And I go, what school let him out of fifth period to come and direct this show? And eventually, I worked with him for one episode. He had a girlfriend, and I wasn't interested in him. But the makeup artist and the hairdresser were like, you should date him. I'm like, A, he has a girlfriend. That's a big no-no to me. I don't believe in that. And B, I'm not interested. I'm separated. I'm super unhappy. And I got to figure out how to get back to my daughter. So he directs us. We have a great time. He's a great director. He's really amazing. And he's done. But he comes back for another episode. And the next time he comes back, he's single. He tells all of us how he's single. He's like, yes, I'm single. Hi, I'm Sandy. You remember me? I'm single. And so all of a sudden it becomes this thing. You got to go out on a date with him. I don't want to go out on a date with him. You got to go out on a date with him. I don't want to. And finally, Sandy and I were talking. We're like almost through the episode. We're like, we're in the part where he's directing. And he had already been there for over a week prepping the show. And I'm in San Diego, just miserable being without Rosabel. And he asks me if I'm going to be in town for that weekend because there's a big music festival. And I say, no, I go home on the weekends to see my daughter. And he said, oh, that's too bad. And I said, but I can come back a little early if you want to have dinner. And he kind of looks at me and he's like, are you asking me out on a date? And I'm thinking to myself, am I asking him out on a date? So I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. And he goes, excuse me, and he walks away. Comes back a couple hours later after he must have had to think about it. Because I think Sandy always had a rule, I'm not going to date actors. And he comes back and he says, yeah, our first date was it. He moved in. We never were apart other than working times after that. And, you know, we fell in love. And we had this, we were together 2 years before we got married and divorced. We got divorced one day before our 14th wedding anniversary. And it was an incredible romance. It was an incredible marriage. I never wanted to travel. He made me travel, forced me to travel, and I fell in love with traveling. I hated food. He loved food. I never wanted to go out and eat, and he forced me to go out to these restaurants, and then I fell in love with food. And he opened my eyes and my world to just things I refused to be even aware of. But my stuff and his stuff always got in the way. And that stuff became toxic. It wasn't that it was always toxic, but when those things came up, they became a weight on me, not on him, that was too much to bear. And eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't have the same fight. I couldn't have the same argument. I saw it coming, and all of a sudden, I would propel myself beyond it. So it wasn't the beginning of a fight anymore. I'd see it coming, and I was already deep in it before it even started to happen. And I didn't know how to break the cycle. And so I broke the cycle by divorcing him. And it was the best thing I ever did because I had to. I had to, because we had been in therapy, and the problem is he never wanted to leave me. He knew we could work it out, but I couldn't find my way. And we had been together 16 years at that point, and I just couldn't. I was hitting that age where I didn't want to fight anymore. I just didn't know how to not. So we got divorced, and I spent the next 3 years trying to figure out what my life was. You know, what did I want my life to be? And I tried to date. I got on the websites, and I went on, like, you know, I'd say I went out with 5 men. They were all lovely, some lovelier than others, but they were just fine. But I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to start. I didn't want to do this all over again. And so I started adopting dogs, got involved in dog charities, dog rescues. I started fostering animals, and that I thought was going to be my life. And then I had that 50-year-old epiphany. I had a falling out with a friend, an important friend who had been very influential in my life and very important in my life. And it was a silly breakdown of communication. It was, you know, a stupid thing, but it destroyed this relationship, which destroyed a lot of what I was doing at that time in my life. And I couldn't figure out why it was so devastating to me. It was devastating to me, and I couldn't understand it. And I turned to my closest girlfriend, Rena, who had been my friend since I was living in New York City. She just said, "When are you ever going to learn this? You take everything so personally. Everything isn't always about you. And sometimes other people have issues, has nothing to do with you." And, you know, she said, even in your marriage, every time Sandy would do something that, you know, was his stuff, you took it as if it were you, that you did something wrong. You took it internally. It devastated you. You couldn't figure out how to get past it. And that's what ultimately destroyed your marriage. It wasn't that what he was doing was not wrong. It was that you couldn't find a way to realize that it had nothing to do with you. And it was like the clouds parted, the sun shone for the first time, and I just went, oh my God. It was the first time I realized my part in the end of our marriage, my part in what had gone wrong, and my part in how if I had understood this when we were married, we wouldn't have gotten divorced like he wanted to stay married. So I kind of just started reaching out to Sandy in the sense of saying, I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my part in this. I'm sorry for what I did. And
which is very freeing, probably. Right?
Yes. I can't understand people who are afraid to apologize for
Right.
what they do, because it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
Yeah. And it's not only probably made Sandy feel better, it makes you feel better,
Yeah.
right? It's this like lifting of whatever's on your shoulders to just rid it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think once I did that with him, it changed our whole relationship, you know, not
He's
where
always loved you.
he's
so
always loved
much.
me, and I've always loved him.
Yeah.
But I was throwing myself a 50th birthday party, and I wanted him to know he was invited. And I just called him and I said, listen, I'm sending you an invitation to my birthday party. And he goes, that's great, but I'm in New York. I'm shooting. He was shooting Power at the time. And he said, I'm literally in the middle of shooting, and your party's on a Sunday, because it was on my birthday. And he said, I can't go, but thank you for inviting me. And I said, I just want you to know there's not going to be anybody there that'll make you uncomfortable. I'm not seeing anyone. There's nobody in my life, but I wanted you to know that I wanted you there. And so I'm at my birthday and I'm just starting, and everybody's starting to come in, and all of a sudden I turn around and he walks in with a backpack, and he flew in for 3 hours. And it just made me realize, you know, while nothing is perfect, isn't that what we look for? Isn't that what I've been on all these websites for? Is to find the person who has my back, right? Who's going to say,
Who's going to make sacrifices because they love you so much.
no matter what happens, this is the most important day so far, and I'm going to be there for you. And I looked at him and I go, what are you doing here? You're shooting. You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to do this. He goes, could never let you turn 50 and not be here, no matter whether we were together or apart. And that was it.
Beautiful.
That's when I was like, oh God.
God, it's so funny because Sandy walked in and we took a picture together. I have a picture of Todd and I and Sandy. I didn't know any of this. And then you guys kind of like declared your love again on Instagram.
Well, we ended up going away that Christmas and New Year's to go visit Rosabel in Vienna, because she was having her Fulbright scholarship. And that's when it, you know, we had been talking, but the second we were out of the country in a hotel room away from everyone, it just happened.
Right.
And then it just happened. We sold our homes. We bought a new house. We got engaged.
I'm in your new house and it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And we just realized, you know, while life is not perfect, I'd rather go through not perfect life with not perfect him and not perfect me than with anybody else.
I love it. It's such a happy ending. It's really beautiful. I'm so thrilled for you guys. And of course, your daughters.
Yes.
Okay, so we're coming to the end, and I ask all my guests this question. If you could write your 20-year-old self, Dear Rena, a love letter, what would it say?
I would say it may take you a long time, but trust the process. It's going to be okay in the end. That's really all I would say, because I can't say don't do this or don't do that. It would have brought me to a different place. So,
but I love that. Trust the process. Like, know that it's going to work out. And we talked about this earlier, that life is a journey, right? It's not a destination. You don't turn 30 and everything's figured out, or 40 or even 50. Okay, I love that. And last question. So besides rescuing dogs and woodworking, by the way, Rena makes beautiful woodworking pieces. So you're very clearly...
And ceramics.
Oh, and ceramics. I mean, you're clearly very artistic like your daughters. What else do you do that grounds you or brings you happiness?
I mean, I think those are the things I do. I took up woodworking and ceramics because I needed to have something for myself. I needed to have an outlet for myself. And I even now make sure every week I spend time doing that. And, you know, 4 dogs later. 5. We just lost our almost 17-year-old dog. But I think that my purpose is I love what I do, but it doesn't define me. I love being a mother, but it doesn't define me. I love all my dogs and my woodworking and my ceramics, but they don't define me. It's all of those things together that help me be who I am. And I am constantly and always will be in search of the next new adventure to come.
And I'm sure Sandy will be planning it.
Yes, he is.
So where can the listeners find you?
Well, I'm on The Bold and the Beautiful. I play Quinn, and I've been on there for almost 6 years, and that is on CBS Daytime.
And your Twitter?
And my Twitter is Rena Sofer. I used to be super active politically. I'm sure I will be in the upcoming election, but I had to take a break on that for a while because of the real massive negativity that's going on in this world. And I just needed to be happy for once as opposed to fighting.
That's tough to be thrown into.
But you can also find me on Instagram, Rena.Sofer. And I really just share my life on Instagram that I'm comfortable sharing. I think I've shared more with you in this interview than I've ever shared with anyone, to be honest.
I'm so
and
honored.
I think that's because we're so close. And I think it's okay to share that now. But I share my daughters and my daughter's artwork, or my daughter playing guitar, or my trips with Meghann doing woodworking, or Sandy and my dogs, and just, the fact that I'm 50 and I'm living my life and that it's all okay.
I love it. And I'll have links to everything you just said in the show notes. But I'm really honored and really touched and just so happy for you. Really, I really am. And, I've always just been kind of in awe of you. Besides the beauty, you're incredibly deep and really intelligent. And I see where your daughters get it from. And I'm so happy for Sandy that, he has you back in his life. And thanks for being my guest, Rena.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.